and welcome to ICHEC's second webinar series edition. Today's webinar is going to address the notion of cultural entrepreneurship, and it is titled Make Culture the Business of Your Life. For those of you just joining us now, welcome. Thank you for coming in and for being with us on this Teams webinar. I would like just to give a quick reminder, a quick moment actually for housekeeping. Please note that we have muted everyone by default, so we won't be disrupted by latecomers. But when you want to talk, please click the microphone icon to mute or unmute yourself. Please note that the webinar will be recorded. If you wish to not appear on the video, you can just keep your camera off. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. That will help us minimize representing underwater sounds. And of course, you're welcome to use the chat box throughout. First of all, and before giving the floor to our three bright speakers, I would like just to give an overview of ICHEC. So ICHEC is an intensive entrepreneurial training program designed for professionals in the cultural and creative industries. It was designed by ICHEC Brussels Management School in response to COVID-19 crisis under the framework of the United Nations International Year for the Creative Economy and Sustainable Development. And this training is designed to guide cultural and creative industries professionals and or aspirants towards starting an entrepreneurial journey, ensure the financial viability of their projects, develop or strengthen their management skills for sustainable, thriving and resilient project, and maximizing the societal contribution and positive impacts of their projects. Actually, some of our ICHEC cultural entrepreneurs are present with us today in this webinar. I would like now to start introducing our three bright speakers. Professor Christian Ost is the president of the Raymond Lemaire International Center for Conservation at KU Leuven University, and he's the honorary rector of ICHEC Brussels Management School. He has been developing the field of economics applied to cultural heritage since the 80s, and he collaborated with many universities and cultural organizations around the world, namely ICROM, UNESCO, the Getty Conservation Institute, Global Heritage Fund, of which he is member of the advisory board, and ECOMOS, for which he chaired the International Economics Scientific Committee between 2000 and 2005. Professor Andy Pratt is a professor of the Department of Media, Culture and the Creative Industry at City University of London. He holds the first chair of Global Creative of UNESCO, chair of Global Creative Economy. Andy specializes in the analysis of the cultural industries globally, and his research has three strands. The first focuses on the social and economic dynamics of clustering and knowledge exchange. The second stance concerns the definition and measurement of employment in the cultural or creative industries, while the third concerns cultural governance and policy making at the national, regional, and urban scales. His current Horizon 2020 research project, Cicerone, concerns translocal cultural production chains. And our last but not least speaker is Elise Boon. Elise is the director of the creative and sustainable ecosystem Fais-le, toi-même, or do it yourself. She is very sensitive to education and autonomy. Fais-le, toi-même is a bit like her first toddler. It's a small, bold, and tenacious non-profit organization that breaks down closed doors and sometimes takes the plunge in order to network and collectively push sustainable craftsmen and entrepreneurs to a new stage of their development. Elise guides and brings together this sustainable ecosystem of craftsmen and entrepreneurs and helps everyone grow and pool their resources. The overall direction of the project, the strategy, and the collective management are in her creative hands. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Christian to tell us more about the notion of cultural entrepreneurship. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ruba, and welcome to everyone. to this second edition of webinar. I will try just to introduce this webinar and about the fact that as you have seen, the first webinar of today is about connecting two words that seems to be antagonistic somehow, culture and business. But okay, we try to see that economics and culture can be related, and this is. I will do that through basically two messages coming from the economic literature and economic theory about first the context and the framework about this term of entrepreneurship that could maybe better explain what we are doing, why we are doing that right now, and about the timing also in economic history. And the second point will be about culture and about the specificities somehow of cultural entrepreneurship. There is also a reason why the timing seems good to do this kind of thing. Okay, so I changed my slide, but you see, I think that what's happening, this is just as an introduction, a painting by Chagall that maybe you may know. There is a lot of representation of what he did himself here, because this is a biblical scene about Joseph interpreting the dreams of pharaohs and explaining that the land of Egypt would have 7 years of we would say crisis or recessions this time, about difficulties and famine, and then 7 years of prosperity, or vice versa, which is exactly the same. Basically, because this is a way to see that the economic is not a linear one, but it's a thing of movement, of cycle. And I think that to introduce the terms of entrepreneurship, it's important to have in mind that we get this kind of what we call in the theory the long waves, long movement of economic growth. This is an example that you have of this to visualize this different since the beginning of the industrial revolution, that we have had 4 to 5 cycles, depending also about maybe the statistical evidence that you bring. But you get also a picture here of someone who made a lot of essays and worked a lot on this subject, which is Joseph Schumpeter. It's not the same as Joseph who spoke to the Pharaoh, but he's a bright economist, Austrian-born, and later being an American professor in economics, who actually started to define the reason why this cycle could emerge and could succeed to each other through some basic notion about invention, innovation, new technologies, and adjustment to a different worlds, I mean, which imply not just economic aspect, but also social aspect, sometimes military and politic aspect. So in other words, a sort of comprehensive or holistic vision of history by going up and down with some. And what is interesting here is that if you see what I represented very in a very summarized way, the fourth wave that started after World War II and came until, I would say, the 80s or the 90s, where you get this culture, of course, taking a very important part in the economy, but also in the social life. Of course, UNESCO, that was bring there, and if I speak about the cultural heritage that I know better, you have this convention of the World Heritage list, World Heritage Monuments, that was just agreed upon 50 years ago. So it's an anniversary, and that was in 72. And exactly the same year, basically the same month, you had the publication of a book that was a first essay from the economist point of view to see that there are limits to grow, which was maybe a very first signal about what we know today about everything about from climate change to environmental concern and to sustainability. I've also on the same graph bring also the important convention by UNESCO on diversity, cultural diversity, and the diversity of cultural expressions. So this is an important debate because this will also have an impact on the global, the alternative, I would say, about maybe a global unilateral way to look at the economy and cultural production of goods and services, or something that it's more maybe elaborated, more various, and open to different debate, different discussion, also with a lot of respect for different part of the world where of course, this notion and these terminologies doesn't have the same signification of meaning. So at the end, on the right-hand side of this graph, of course, you get this question mark about, is it a fifth wave, sixth wave? Where does it start? It's very difficult. We are inside this experience, so maybe we will, in a few decades, it will be clear. It will be easier to tell that. But what is sure is that we have some new technologies, digital technologies, that the world is changing a lot in terms of the social also and political aspect, and that sustainability has become mainstream and become mostly accepted everywhere, are something that will have a lot of impact on everything. And this is why I bring here the Sustainable Development Goals on this scheme. So if this first message or this first, I would say, conclusion would be to tell about the fact that we get a transition period. This is clearly what we have, which is probably, when you read here the sequence, indicated that there is somehow a link and a connection between everything that happens on the level of technology, engineering, inventions, innovation, but also social and cultural aspect, because at the end of the day, you get this creativity playing a role here. And if I can just pinpoint this aspect about creativity, we can, the message would be here to understand which kind of factors, which kind of conditions are important or decisive in a way that we can go through this transition period. And even if it's very complex and that it requires maybe a lot of time to explain and to look at that in the different sectors, the different countries, and so on. It's basically, we know that entrepreneurship is probably one of the aspects, because this is following the Schumpeter analysis of the different long waves throughout history. There has been also in during this transition, and as an important conditions, the fact that some people, men and women, were really keen, you see, to make things happening, to change, and to provide some new inventions, basically back on the market, and to make some dream come true in a way, but to create the conditions for years of growth. So this is about the timing that I was suggesting that could be important today, that entrepreneurship is maybe one of these conditions that we need to develop in all the sectors today, and that is important today rather than maybe that's the reason why it's maybe more important when we see the conditions where we are. So the second message that I would like to give is to see that how accurate could be of course, training and lessons and improving not just capacity building, but also the fact that entrepreneurship for the stakeholders and for each level of actors in the economy and society could be important. The main example that, and I think that all other speakers can, of course, know that better than I do, but the cultural and creative industries are probably one of the core, of the crossroads about all this phenomenon that I'm just explaining here, that goes from economic, social, but also impact on the skills, the jobs, and also all the evolved markets about. So culture, creativity being a word that typically comes also from the artistic world, but back that this creativity and provides also some innovation at the level of industries, not just the single individual artistic work or artistic piece of art, but that it's gets a critical mass, I would say, so that it's part of this long wave movement. I would just suggest here to have this definition about entrepreneurship, looking at the different level where it can be attached. And this is a model that it's inspired by a cultural economist from the Netherlands, Arjo Klamer, where you get different part of society and different part of the economy also that contribute all together to something that it's, you know, a new creative and growing part of the long wave movement, that it starts from the individual behavior. This is what he called oikos, because oikos is the Greek word that means the home, what is the closest approach to what you do, and that provide also, of course, the root of the term economics. Economics comes from oikos, nomos, so being able to manage your home. And so from the individual contribution to the society, you go at another level about the social, which is first the family circle, then the friends, so the social network, and then that the discussion that we have often in economic and in policies about market versus government, private versus public intervention, is not just at the core of the process. It's no more such important that it has been in the literature, because these are just two things that could support the movement and bring some helps, which have a lot of implication. If you look at artists or cultural sectors or cultural institutions looking for financing, usually they go either about the government or to sponsorship or mecenate or through the market. But these two pillars, in a way, are just further contribution, further additions to the contribution that we have in everything being embedded in the culture, which it at the same time is more a societal, I would say, feature than the social, being a difference between the social and the societal aspect, and being the kind that provide values for everything. So this is the basic model about a shared economy, about a value-based economy where we share goods, where you share services, and everyone can contribute to it. And from that model, this is where I'm suggesting that entrepreneurship is important, because it's important at each of the level. From an individual point of view, how you can contribute yourself to that, to a more social and institutional or organizational thing. Just maybe 2 or 3 examples to close. This is the end of the presentation. This is a way to express this value-based economy or the shared goods. This is an example. If you make a festival, a cultural festival, you see that you bring their individual contributions, because you get musicians, you get music instruments, but then you get the collective, something that's happening on a collective level. This is the orchestra, and then there is the audience, and we say that we know that the result or the success of playing a concert depends from both sides of the way. So it's a way to share something and to contribute all together. And of course, you can have additional contributions, as I said, through either the market, the government, or the society in itself. So should have need more time to, of course, precise everything, but I think that this is the kind of holistic view that we can see, where entrepreneurship basically through the different, I would say, the different skills or the different definition that you can provide to entrepreneurship can provide something not just at the capitalistic level, you see, or company that it used to be, but really about extent to different sectors and to different level of size scales and also individual thing. So this is just for you to read, because this is a sort of collection of different expression that you can find when you speak about entrepreneur, and you see that even Schumpeter spoke about these big entrepreneurs as social deviants, which is interesting, but that was in the 1950s. But okay, this is open to see that it's have a bigger scale or a bigger, I mean, framework that it used to be. A last example would be an example here in the field of conservation and cultural heritage. Is an example where we contribute through the KU Leuven and some academic collaboration about how a community can contribute, you know, to renovate a place, a small village, where this is in Ecuador, where the academic and the university was playing a role, where the military and the soldiers came also and provide some assistance and some contributions in terms of manpower, in terms of human resources, and where at the end of the day you get this, you know, really the shared economy and these kind of contributions, which requires entrepreneurship at each level of the stakeholder that you get. All the forms of crowdfunding, modern crowdfunding, to say the least, but you know that as I know, it is also the form of this in the financial field, I would say, in terms of this entrepreneurship and shared economy. So suggest to stop here, because I think that the time is up, and we can maybe bring in the discussion if you want some other example or some additions to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian, for this thought-provoking contribution. I would like to re-echo your three messages. Actually, you started by telling us that in a period of creative destruction, entrepreneurship is key. You elaborated also on the importance of cultural and creative industries as key players of the society, and you ended your contribution by highlighting the fact of the role of commons and the contribution of culture and society as a whole to the concept. Andy, moving from this provocative contribution, what's your take on the evolution of the concept and the interaction or the reaction from policy in this regards, especially in a post-COVID situation?
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, I'd like to take some of the points that Christian has raised and maybe push them a little bit further in some ways and to question them. And I think it was very interesting that he provided us with this idea of economic transformation. And I would like to remind and perhaps problematize this issue a little bit in saying actually traditional economists find it quite difficult to explain how newness enters the world, how innovation happens. They're good at resolving market imbalances and finding equilibrium points and the price of things. But how newness comes into the world I think is a challenge. I think it reflects actually on what we've just heard about, because a lot of the things that we've heard about were not about economic things, but about the social and cultural environment in which that economic activity takes place in this sense. And also we heard about things like institutions and wider supports. And I think this is a preliminary point that I think it's important to make. There's a substantial debate in economic explanation about newness and change and transformation, and the more limited only economic accounts aren't very good at talking about why change occurs. The accounts that bring in a wider social forces, economic forces and organizational forces and issues about policy are the ones that really tell us a bit more about the transformation of change. And work like Schumpeter's, for example, is bringing in not just the economic issues, but also these broader social and organizational issues as well. So I think that's a really important point, that the relationship between institutions, culture and social aspects, and the economic is, I think that's the field that we're dealing with, and not solely the economic. And I think that both is a problem for us as analysts, as well as a problem for trying to account for things. So that's an important point. And just the second point I wanted to pick up on about this idea of the waves of innovation. Certainly there's been a lot of debate about whether the latest wave is about information technology or about information, or about a combination of them both. Yeah. So this idea of the role of knowledge in transformation is a key issue. And in fact, that whether it's simply the technology or whether it's the application of the technology, as we see. And I think if we look in everyday products, we can see lots of examples of the way that oftentimes it's not, in a sense, the best technology, but it's the application of that technology. You know, we can think of the way that, for example, Apple products that give so much emphasis on the design and are so much more expensive, but nevertheless are that people are encouraged to buy them because of the way that they fit in with one another as part of an ecosystem, an interrelated set of activities. So my point there is not to praise Apple products or other products. It's simply to note that it's not price only. There are these other factors that are important in terms of why things are more successful. Often they're a cultural dimension, and obviously in products like Apple, but also if you look at motor cars, etc., it's the design element of them. Yeah, and it's this element of design that encourages us to buy things and consume things in a way. So these elements of cultural and social have become more important, perhaps, than simply the economic forces. Certainly, we need a balance of those things. So that's a really important thing. And that this final point about that the latest wave, some people have argued, is actually about the cultural economy. Because in a sense, that's the economy beyond simply knowledge and information, but it's about the weaving together of technology in part of this consumption process as well. So culture in itself is the future, some people are arguing. Okay, so we'll just give you that idea. So I've got two particular things that I want to talk about, which digs down a little bit more deeper into these issues. The first is to recognize the actually existing condition of entrepreneurship, and that is invariably of people working either on their own account or in micro enterprises. Yeah, when we talk in economics and organizations and policy about small firms, actually the definition of a small firm is below 250 people. Yeah, actually what we're talking about when we commonly talk about small firms, we're talking about, certainly 50 people, less than that, and micro enterprises are of 5 or 6 people. And then there's the self-employed, which is, individual as well. So we're talking about an entirely different type of work experience, and that's people invariably starting up with new ideas. Yeah, that's what they're trying to sell, the idea. Yeah, and that's their strength. That's their market opportunity. Is they're coming along with a new idea or a new process, and they're trying to possibly scale it at some stage and build a larger firm. But invariably, their market advantage is coming up with a new idea, and they have to convince people to consume it. However, what that means is that you have a particular forms of organisation in the particularly in the cultural sector, which are referred to as project-based enterprises. So these are firms, enterprises, yeah, but they have a short life. They only last as long as a single project. Yeah. So if you take an example of say making a film, for example, yeah, you might have a company formed simply to make that film. Yeah, and when the film is over, then the company dissolves. So this project-based enterprise is, if you think about it, it's an incredibly agile, it's a very responsive, very innovative approach to solving problems. Yeah, basically a project-based enterprise is like you call all your friends or the experts, bring them together for a project and apply to the project, and then after the project you disperse. So you've got no carrying costs of continuation of the of a firm, etc. Everything is focused on the activity. So they're all the things that lead to agility and being able to do things new in different ways, etc. They also invariably cut across the traditional boundaries between the formal and the informal. People are often moving between these different spheres of activity, and this complicates the normal way that we think about employment. Because if you're working on a short-term project and you're employed and then you're unemployed for a period of time, from a statistical point of view, are you employed or unemployed? Yeah, well, of course, you're both. And you might be working several jobs. So how many jobs have you got? One or more? So for statisticians and for anybody trying to understand how many people are actually employed in this area, it can be very complicated. Yeah, because our model of counting employment is based on many years ago when everybody used to go to work in a factory, yeah, in that way. So things have changed. These are things that complicate our understanding of the employment process. The second issue that I want to raise is, I guess, the other side of that is that whilst these are significant strengths, they are also at the same time weaknesses. They are weaknesses because the traditional idea of the continuity of employment, a job, is not really present in this freelance world. Yeah, that you are employed for a period of time and then the project ends, and if you're lucky, you find a job in another project. And moving in a serial project basis is obviously the ideal, but as we all know, that's not always possible, and particularly when the economy slumps, and ever so more when COVID arrives. Yeah, so this issue of continuity of employment is both a strength and a challenge in this area. And before I talk about COVID in particular in here, I want to raise this issue that it's the reproduction of the labour force, the ability for people to get themselves ready for work the next day or the next year in terms of their training, in terms of their social welfare and health and education, etc. That, in a sense, is not supplied in this project-based world. that is so popular in the cultural sector and in many other areas as well, that many of these social support mechanisms and institutional support mechanisms are absent. And therefore, in the good times, it's great. People are moving seamlessly between one activity and another. But in the bad times, then there are gaps in employment, and people are unemployed, and they don't have any work. And to illustrate this, in the sense that many people in the cultural sector, even for example in what are apparently large organizations like theatres, most of the people that do the lighting, the sound engineers, the scenic design, etc., are self-employed. Yeah. So in COVID, when there were no performances, basically those people were just not hired. I mean, of course, their employer didn't need to lay them off because they were employed on a self-employed contract that basically didn't have any continuity of employment. And therefore, if you're in that job of support workers in the cultural sector, then basically you had no work. And this was seen as and recognised as a significant problem, because most of the state-funded support that many workers got in COVID-19 was linked to traditional unemployment benefits or continuity with work. Self-employed people were not covered, and the cultural sector was not covered. And therefore, a number of discussions about this particular problem took place. France and Germany had already got existing schemes, and they were used as examples. But these are sorts of jobs, sorts of schemes that provide you with payment between jobs. Yeah, between performances, or where you're as actors call this period when they're resting. Okay, so between between one run of a play and another run of a play, this type of thing. So this is a common problem in all areas of the cultural field. It's one in COVID that has been highlighted. This has always been recognised, but COVID obviously really pushed it to the top of the agenda. And this idea of the need for continuing support has come to the fore in our concerns in terms of policy making, and it's also allied with a number of other debates which are related to other reforms in the labour market, referred to as universal basic income. The idea that some areas of the labour market require basically a payment to keep people circulating in the labour market, and that this is a necessary, if you like, a resource for when the economy grows more. But this is the particularity of the cultural sector. So I won't go on anymore. I can add lots of things there, but I guess what I wanted to say was that the social and cultural embedding, as Christian referred to it, is an important part of this whole process. But the nature of cultural work is often a balancing act between very precarious labour and the need for an institutional support system, which is about intermediaries, which is about training services, etc. And that balance is one that the cultural sector sort of maintains, but it's done often on an informal sort of basis. It's not necessarily planned, and therefore when you have shocks to the system like COVID, that support system falls apart. And these issues of continuity and the maintenance of what we might refer to as an ecosystem of support is needed to be addressed. So hopefully that's helped raise another dimension to this issue of, if you like, a more micro aspect of little insight into the nature of cultural work, but also these tensions between the individual and a more collective environment.
Thank you very much, Andy, actually, for this inspiring reflection. You've been building upon Christian's reflection, starting from the ecosystem and the fact that there's a need to speak more about culture, society, and the economy, and that we cannot speak anymore in terms of economic ranking and metrics only. You also elaborated beautifully on the uniqueness of the cultural sector and on the specificity of its employment in terms of the modality of being micro and very small medium enterprises, where this project-based enterprise is very agile, is very responsive and innovative, but at the same time is very fragile and precarious. And the fact that there's a lack of universal rights and ad hoc policy making for the labor market in support of this very fragile ecosystem was actually a disaster during the COVID crisis, and who knows, maybe in many crises to come, if there is no particular attention towards this very fragile aspect. Thank you very much for this very inspiring insight. And I would like to ask Elise, who actually manages an ecosystem of precarious craftsmen and entrepreneurs, to draw on on Andy's and Christian's reflections and tell us more about your own cultural entrepreneurial journey.
Thank you, Ruba. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes, cool.
Yes.
So, yeah, I will tell you a bit about my entrepreneurial journey, which has been quite a journey. A bit about myself first, because I think it might make sense at some point. I'm the founder of an association called Fais-le, toi-même, so the exact translation of do it yourself in English. I'm 32. I was born in Waterloo, but I live in Brussels, and my dad is a teacher in economics, and my mom was a small business owner. I think it makes sense because it gave me quite the entrepreneur mindset. My dad wanted me to be the prime minister of some state, and my mom hated her work and always told me that I could do exactly whatever I wanted to do. I think that this brought me where I am now. So I came to Brussels when I was a teenager, being very bored of my neighborhood in Waterloo, which is quite rich and not really innovative, if I can say. And then after high school, I went for cultural studies. So I went to cinema studies, making my dad very sad because I didn't go into business studies. Those studies gave me really skills in project managing, because you learn how to make a movie from scratch, and how to direct it, to produce it, to organize it, and how to sell it. It gives you the basics to in small economics and financial aspects. Then I finished my study in cinema, and I went for documentary and media education. Those gave me another approach. The documentary part of it was really mostly about youth and how young people can bring their own voices into mass media. That gave me the love of empowerment with a tool. At that time, it was a camera or a microphone, and then I just changed the tool. But the value and the visions that brought me to doing Fais-le, toi-même came at that point. And then it gave me social skills too. And for, I guess, 6 years, I think, I've been a freelancer myself. So when you speak about the really ups and downs, the positive and negative effects, the stability, I do really understand that, and that brought me to doing my own business too. At the time, I was working in an NGO. We were 4, all freelance, and at some point I left. I loved the job, but I left because we didn't have a collective vision of where we were going and how we will gain stability with our work. And it was really too risky for me. I mean, I could do it for a short time, but I didn't see myself working and living that life which is a really anxious life forever. So I had the time to put a bit of money aside and started my own business as a freelancer myself. So you were in Belgium, you were able to have an association to build it and then to freelance for your own business. So I did that for a few years, earning really kind of nothing. And let me jump back into the past. But when I told you that empowerment with a tool was really what I loved, at some point I realized that for craftsmen and craft artists in Belgium, there was something lacking in autonomy, in self-determination, and to empowerment for those actors, really. I think I was about 25 years old, so pretty young. I had a few skills in project managing, but I didn't have really business skills. So at that point, I had only the name, Fais-le, toi-même. I knew I wanted to improve autonomy for craft artists in Belgium. That's it. And then I told a coworker what I wanted to do, the name. That's it. And she jumped into the business with me. So we wanted to be self-sufficient ourselves with all the aspect of leading and building a business. So at that point, we followed every class, every coaching, every state offer that we could to learn whatever we could learn about running a business. So we did the Green Lab, which is more focused on circular economy and sustainability. We went to Village Partenaire, we did Job Yourself. I don't know how you say couveuse in English, but we followed every class that we could to at least understand every aspect of running a business. So I founded Fais-le, toi-même in 2016. It has evolved a lot since then, but our goal has always been to support autonomy, collaboration, and creation. And to do those, we have three main activities. So the first one, which is the biggest one really, we create collaborative workspaces for craft artists in Brussels. The idea is really to support them by bringing them together in spaces. So we are writing models of governances. Thank you, Ruba. Can I take the lead on this? Oh no. That's okay. Can you go to the next page? Okay. Yeah, okay, cool. So the few pictures that you just saw is one of our biggest spaces called L'Extension. So this is one of the collaborative workspace. What we do in this space is bring communities of mixed public together. So mostly craft artists, but with entrepreneurs, association, or pedagogic or creativity association. We try to support them by training them. We wrote a very individual program to business training for craft artists. It's kind of a new way of coaching, with really an invention. We are trying to train them in a very holistic way. If you want to know more about it, I can talk about it after. And then we organize events too. We have small events as workshops because they want to share their skills, meet the public, sensibilize on what they're doing. And then we have very big events. We organize mostly sales events, so markets such as Christmas markets, for them to make money because they need to. Now, the association Fais-le, toi-même is still an association, but we are 4 employees and we have 50 members on site. So the picture you're looking at, and they are trying to grow 17 projects in that space. This is a picture of one of our big events that you can see, craft markets, basically. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it for me. If you have any questions, feel free.
Okay, thank you very much, Elise, for sharing your entrepreneurial journey with us, and actually for explaining a little bit about how Fais-le, toi-même works. One of Fais-le, toi-même is a C-ship participant, and we were very happy to have her with us. Thanks also to the collaboration with you. If you all agree, I would like to open the floor for questions. Yes, Anne-Christine, please, the floor is yours.
Bonjour. Thank you, everyone. Professor Christian Ost, this question is for you. A couple of times in the past week, I have come across the notion, and you brought it up too, that there is a limit to growth. And yet here we are sitting in a class on entrepreneurial. Can you help me reconcile this conservative, not conservatism, but this caution and towards the limit of growth, and then what we're trying to push 10 projects off the ground here?
Anne-Christine, this is the question. No, it's a fact that the limits of growth, this is what was named in the 70s. But these days we have theory of décroissance in French, or so lower growth, or let's say not lower growth, but negative growth almost. And there is also this kind of I don't know that if there is a common agreement on that. So I give a bit my perception of that. Is the fact that the most important thing that we have here is what kind of value we create, what kind of growth we make. It's not about the level of growth or being above zero line or under the zero line. So the way maybe to connect these two ideas is to say that culture and cultural activities may contribute to grow, but in different way that the main industries do it. And telling that, it's still a simplification, because of course the industries are changing, they're all evolving and not doing the same way that they do in the past. So if you take the climate change into perspective or sustainability, you know that if you do something, okay, you get some impact that you want to, that maybe in the past you didn't care about, that here is part of what you do, and not just in terms of responsibility, but also in terms of being able to keep your customer and to do and to be sustainable in time. So I would leave the question just about the level of limits of growth aside, but would really think about what kind of value we create. In other words, what kind of growth we want. And then this is about production. This is about supply, but you know, there is also in economic the question of distribution. So it's the question of to whom, and what do you make with the benefits and the profit you get. And there, of course, there is two levels of growth. You can have a very different distribution. You can have a very different countries where you get more equality and social equality than in other countries. And then again, it's not to me related to growth in itself, but these are the questions. But I see that Andy will extend, say something also interesting there.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, I think it's the substantive point is that there's more than one way to grow. We know as human beings we can grow very tall, or we can grow in intelligence, or can grow in insight, etc. And I think this multiple direction of growth, and clearly environmentally, and we're thinking about not choosing paths of growth that are intensive resource consumption directions, but there are many other ways to grow, and it might be growing laterally, it might be growing our more sustainable developments, etc. So I think, you know, growth is, what's interesting about growth is that I think it touches upon one of the issues that's coming up here is it's not simply about economic value, but it's about the multiplicity of values that are part of this relationship. And the more that you speak, certainly I speak to entrepreneurs, and particularly cultural entrepreneurs, I think we find out they want to innovate in different ways. They want to find better solutions to things. It's this issue that the better solution may well be the use of environmental thinking, the social and cultural dimensions that aren't necessarily about the economic. And again, if you speak to many entrepreneurs, then they are more interested in, if you like, changing the world than becoming a multimillionaire. Yeah, they need money to live, but the challenge of having an interesting life and doing something useful is a value that many hold as significant. So I think we've had a distorted view of what entrepreneurship is, that is only about making lots and lots of money and destroying the earth and destroying our friendships. There are other ways. I think certainly when I speak to cultural entrepreneurs, they say, yeah, of course, I need to make some money. But actually, there's more than one way to make money. And actually, I want to make money that is going to be positive to me and positive to the community I'm part of. I want to do it in a particular way. And it's those value systems that often get overlooked when we only look at the accounting balance. And we forget that actually why people are doing this is because they care in one form or another. And if that issue of caring is also about why they are probably better than somebody else. You know, would you buy something from somebody who's enthusiastic about something, who really cares about, shares your values, or somebody who simply only wants to make more money? And I think that has become a way, and I guess coming back to the different waves of innovation and development, that's becoming a compelling argument for consumers, not simply price competition, but value-based competition. And entrepreneurship is the cutting edge of new forms of activity, and so it's not surprising that we find it illustrated there.
And I would add that, Elise, you are a fantastic example of everything that Andy and Christian have talked about, in that you bring that dimension, and for you it's what you breathe. You did not highlight it yourself in economic terms, but I think what Andy says is very pertinent to your case, is that everything you talk about does not stand on a balance. It's not written down on a balance sheet, and yet that is what you bring to the Brussels ecosystem and the European ecosystem.
Yeah, if I may, do you hear me? Yes. If I may add something, it's just that we were talking at the beginning with Christian of the sixth wave of innovation. For me, it's really personal, that I think it's going to be collaboration and transition. All the craft artists that I work with, they're working towards transition, but not really like only ecological or economic, is also social transition and even systemic transition. And I really think that those values are more important than money, and money will come to them at some point, so in some ways, but it's not the first goal.
Thank you very much, Elise. Actually, I want to come back to Andy's point on the multiplicity of values. Andy, you were mentioning that the sixth wave, a lot of people are arguing that it's related to the creative economy. How can we measure the multidimensional impacts and values of this creative economy?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, isn't it? Yes. I think the important point is that I think it's difficult to give a prescriptive answer and say you can measure it in this way or that way. The most important thing is to move towards a diversity of measures and not to reduce our measures to only economic ones or traditional economic ones. And I think having a wider range of measures, which are basically a wider appreciation of what people are doing. So we can actually learn that some of these cultural and social values are what motivates people and what pushes them forward to the next thing, not only money. And it's a combination of those. businesses that are in the if you like, the normal economy, it tends to be more about the economic aspects. But the more you get towards a more innovative field, I think it's the role of social and cultural passions that drive people. I think appreciating that as those if we're trying to understand how these businesses operate, what the consequences of them are, etc., we need to look beyond the bottom line. We need to look at the way that people want to engage in other fields of activity, and if we're going to explain it, I think that's an important point. So there's not a simple answer, but clearly multiplicity of measures, I think, is better than a single measure or metric, because that will represent a little bit more, I think.
Thank you very much, Andy. We have a question from Teresa. Teresa, would you like to pose the question yourself? She's referring to the waves of innovation as well. You pointed out that the latest wave is about the cultural economy. What could the future of culture look like from your perspective?
I'll refer back to what people are referring to often about the culture playing a bigger role in being the, if you like, the unique selling point or USP of any product or service in this way. And I'm sure you've heard of Pine and Gilmore's work on the experience economy. I think that's another example of the way that certain types of culture are, if you like, sought to be commodified as part of the offer of this. I mean, culture, I mean, in a sense, tourism has always been about an experience, and so it's nothing new, but I think there's been a lot more attention on the fact that actually people are interested in, if you like, an existential engagement with the world that changes them internally rather than simply just having more stuff. Yeah, I think this way in which we're thinking about change ourselves is I guess the direction of travel of the next few years. I guess that is going to be an important part of what we do, as well as environment, and of course linking those together. It's, you know, how do we change ourselves? I mean, I'm vegetarian, and one of the reasons that I've chosen to be a vegetarian is about the environment, and I've been for 20 years. But it's, you know, that's a sort of millennial sort of thing that we'll do. I'm not millennial, but you know, that's the changes that the people are linking different aspects of their life together. I think that's an illustration of those sorts of things, I think. I don't know whether that's any help.
Yes, no, thank you. That was a great answer. I would just add one tiny follow-up question about, just because you mentioned there's probably a disconnection about the environment and culture. And I was wondering if this has maybe also the potential of this reinvention or reinventive potential within culture to maybe have a new, completely different and also inspiring future within.
I think that definitely. I mean, I think, you know, to take the example of tourism. I mean, if you look at the way that tourism has changed from mass tourism to arts and culture tourism to the latest iteration, which is creative tourism. So the idea that you go and you don't objectify the environment that you're in, but you go and live with it. And you might engage in learning a craft skill in situ in some way. So therefore, you're sort of subverting the sort of subject-object relationship of seeing tourism as objectifying the world to actually exploring the world in a different way. And I think maybe that's an example of the way that experiences, etc., might engage us in this way. So yeah, that's one idea, but I'm sure there are many others. Christian, you also were going to come in, I think.
I agree with what you said, but to add something for Teresa, showing that in the future, what we can expect, there will be a change of paradigm, at least in terms of culture, the role of culture. I mean that, and it's still difficult. I mean to convince people that culture can be instrumental to something. Of course, to something that it's bigger than just money profit. I'm not speaking about that, but about sustainability, about climate change and all the big issues. That means that you see this change of paradigm makes people from the cultural field being aware that they contribute to something in the way that was explaining the contribution to an economy of the commons, of public goods, and so on. And I must say in the conservation world that it's not completely easy to explain that, because you get a lot of countries where culture is public funded. It's less in I think in the UK and the US, Andy, but you still have, in the southern part of Europe, countries where, people expect to get funded for their cultural goals because, okay, it's an end in itself. And I think that there is where an entrepreneurship can play a role there, also the way to finance, some new way of hybrid financing, to rely to some other tools, some other tools of governance also. That means not to rely to a top-down or, well, the expert, gets the final word about what culture should be, but also a bottom-up approach where the community can be not just aware about that, but maybe discuss about the cultural values. And that opens a lot of doors to me, which is not easy maybe, but which goes really in a different direction. I give you just a last example. I mentioned the Convention of Cultural Heritage Conservation, 72, just 50 years. There is a group of discussion now, at UNESCO. How do we need to improve this convention? Okay, I don't believe that there will be any new convention, because if you start a new one, you will never have an agreement about 180 countries on the topic. But what is important to see is that these conventions played a successful role during the 50 years, up to now, because you have listed this, you have protection, everything is not perfect, but it provides really a successful result. But now it's time to look at this heritage in another way, not just to list it, not just to protect it, but to use it in more integrated for in terms of spatial integration, in terms of sustainable tourism, in terms of referring to the new technologies and to the new needs and so on, not to keep it as it necessarily as it is. And this again is a difficult question. You imagine that you go sometimes against the convention of conservation when someone in Africa lives in a house which is protected by UNESCO listed, and they can't afford to make a kitchen or a bedroom somewhere because they can't, take that, make that changes in a heritage building. So these are all I think the question that could be really bring culture together with some, some different goals.
Thank you very much, Christian. We're actually running out of time, but we still have 2 questions maybe to which we need to provide quick answers. Andy, you have a question from Yusuf Subai. Dear Andy, it was a pleasure meeting you in South Africa. My question is, what's the main intersection between creative and circular economies? How can entrepreneurs work on this issue? This is something Elise actually is dealing with every day. We have a question from Huda. In countries where culture has been instrumental in the social and national struggle, while context is quite fragile at almost all levels, would it be realistic to develop economic entrepreneurship aspects of culture? Actually, we have another question. Hi, I'm a student who's studying culture, and I have a question for Elise. For sustainable business and encouraging entrepreneurs in the cultural sector, what supports is needed most? I'm curious about your thought as an entrepreneur. And Teresa is asking everyone. So maybe a quick round of answers to the 3 questions. Andy, would you like to start by maybe answering?
Sure, okay. Just a quick point about, I guess, the circular economy, which we haven't really talked about, but I mean, certainly, I think there have been some more innovative thinking about opening the scope of culture rather than simply as about consumption, but that culture is produced and reproduced, and it requires decisions about what happens to natural resources and what happens to whether we extract new ones or how we recycle them in the first place. And I think it's it's a wider notion of culture that is entirely sympathetic, but I think as professionals, either we've been focused on heritage or tourism or whatever, rather than seeing the interconnection between all these different aspects of culture. And again, the notion of seeing culture not only as the realm of artists, but also the realm of all of the other support activities, social, cultural, economic, and training, etc., facilities. This notion of a broader ecosystem of cultural production, I think, allows us to think in more creative ways about governance and more environmentally positive ways as well.
Elise, would you like to elaborate there? You have a direct question for you.
Yeah, it's quite a difficult question to summarize, but we'll try. I think that maybe the first thing is that the trainings have to bring together the idea of business and creativity. We need to stop having a dichotomy between them. I think in all the trainings, we have really to think about both of those aspects all together and just make it one aspect and not two separate things. And think too that we have to encourage new ways of working. I think that collaboration, mutualization are two keys that are essentials. Most of the cultural entrepreneurs and craft artists, I mean, mostly feel quite alone. And the battle feels too big. I think we need to bring them together to work together. And I would say that the third thing is that we should help them to connect to their vision and values. Sometimes they start their business, they don't really know exactly why, and at some point it gets really difficult to carry the load and the amount of work if you don't really connect to why you are doing this. The vision and the values are really, really important. And mostly in the economic training, in the business training, that part is kind of a quick one. And I think it should be really the main one.
Ruba, just a word about the second question, because
Sure.
I know that we are a bit out of time, but Uda just mentioned there a very important question. Of course, we see that this is an application about culture in country, things that you know better than I do, but I will try to answer to that. The fact that, of course, and when you take the heritage, you know, again, that it's you get these places of memories, you get this sometimes the conflicting issues, the use of heritage as a political tool, and so on and so forth. I think that the entrepreneurship, I would say, should be seen as not just, well, creating value, but in a way that this value could be a mediation or could be a tool of diplomacy about that. There is an Horizon 2020 European project made at the KU Leuven, Elucidare, who was made on that, and I can provide maybe some information to Uda if you want. This is what we call today the dissonant heritage. I don't know if there's a dissonant in French, but I think that is the same word. It's sound, you know, the dissonant heritage. And this is there is interesting research there, you know, to see how we can basically use culture and the heritage to achieve peace, to achieve security, and to get some to create some value of cohesion and living together and this kind of thing. But I would call that entrepreneurship in a broader sense. This is what I'm optimistic to do.
Thank you very much, Christian. I would like to thank the three of you for the very inspiring insights you provided. You're leaving us with a lot of food for thought. Christian, you helped us reflect and reimagine again the periods of creative destruction and what the role of entrepreneurs could be, and especially cultural entrepreneurs. Andy, you actually helped us think in an ecosystem perspective and how the role of all of us, the cultural sector, institutions, and economics could work together towards transforming the precariousness and the challenges of the sector into an opportunity to change the rules of the game of the labor market and provide further support for the fragility of the sector. Elise, you talked us through your personal journey, and you actually introduced also the systemic approach you are leading in Fais-le, toi-même, together with the craftsmen and sustainable entrepreneurs, and how you are all working towards achieving a positive impact entrepreneurship, and how important mutualization, mixing a training about creativity and entrepreneurship, and also connecting with the values and visions of the entrepreneurs. Thank you very much for these very important insights. Before waving goodbye, I would like just to remind our participants of our upcoming second webinar, Cultural Entrepreneurs and Money, a Love and Hate Affair. It will take place on Thursday, 8 December at the same time from 4 to 5:15 Central European Time. Please note that you will receive a follow-up email asking you to evaluate this webinar, and the recording will be available on C-Shape's LinkedIn page. Thank you all for coming together on Teams, and we look forward to welcoming you soon again. Thank you very much, and goodbye.